What if you walked into the wrong room, and it led you to the life you didn't know you still deserved? And what if the man on the other side of that mistake was just as lost as you were? Evelyn Brooks wasn't looking for redemption. She wasn't chasing love or second chances. She just needed a job, any job, but one wrong elevator ride, one mistaken interview, and suddenly she was sitting across from Graham Lancaster, a widowed billionaire, known more for his silence than his soul. He didn't expect her. She didn't belong there. And yet, neither of them walked away. What begins as a misunderstanding turns into a temporary arrangement, professional on paper, personal behind closed doors. But how long can two people pretend before the act becomes real? Can a woman rebuilding her life learn to trust again? Can a man who's buried his heart beneath spreadsheets find the courage to feel? What if the wrong office wasn't a detour, but destiny? If you've ever believed that healing can begin in the most unexpected places, that connection is louder than status, like share and subscribe to Shining Stories, because some of the best love stories begin with a mistake. Now, let's begin. Evelyn Brooks had always been a woman of quiet resolve. At 38, she had learned to carry both strength and sorrow in the same breath without dramatics, without complaint. Her life hadn't gone as planned. But then again, who's had that morning? She clutched a well-worn leather folder close to her chest as she walked into the Hartville Towers. The building was sleek, glass-wrapped, and too modern for her taste. She preferred old things, things with history and cracks that told stories. She was here for a job interview, not her first, and likely not her last. The position administrative assistant for a small tax firm called Hillman and Rhodes, located according to the vague email confirmation on the 5th floor, but between the long security check, the echoing lobby, and a helpful but mistaken security guard, Evelyn ended up on floor 15 instead. She didn't realize the mistake immediately. The receptionist didn't blink when Evelyn gave her name, just handed her a guest badge and said, "Conference room C, down the hall. Mr. Lancaster will see you shortly." Mr. Lancaster. Evelyn echoed, but the woman was already answering a call, her voice switching to professional cheerfulness like a flipped light switch. Still, Evelyn walked. The hallway was eerily silent. The walls were lined with abstract art in cold colors, the kind that made her feel smaller than she already did. She stopped in front of a glass door marked Conference Room C, took a breath, and walked in. The room was large, sleek, painfully minimalist. A single folder sat on the table in front of the only occupied chair. Behind that folder sat a man, early 40s, sharply dressed in a dark gray suit, posture straight, face unreadable. He looked up as she entered, his eyes sharp as glass. "You're Evelyn Brooks." Yes, you're early." "Good," he said, gesturing to the chair opposite. "Let's begin." There was no warm-up, no handshake, no tell me about yourself, just silence and that pair of assessing eyes. Evelyn sat, adjusting her skirt, suddenly unsure if she should open her folder or keep it closed. "Your resume is unconventional," the man said, flipping through a copy she hadn't given him. "Well," she replied with a small smile, "so is my life." He didn't smile back. Graham Lancaster, as she would later learn, was known for two things, building Lancaster and Hayes into one of the most ruthless financial consulting firms in the Northeast, and having the emotional range of a brick wall. "Why do you want this position?" he asked. Evelyn hesitated. The question shouldn't have been hard, but this didn't feel like the interview she was expecting. "I need stability," she said finally. "I need to build something again. I used to run my own real estate office. Before life changed. I don't expect pity. I just need work, and I'm good at what I do." He studied her face like he was decoding a riddle. "And you're here for the executive assistant role." She nodded slowly, then blinked. "Wait, executive assistant?" "Yes," he said, narrowing his eyes. "To the CEO? Full-time. Travel occasionally. High discretion. Why else would you be on the 15th floor?" Her mouth opened, then closed again. This wasn't Hillman and Rhodes. This was Lancaster and Hayes, a multinational consulting firm with strict hiring standards, glass-walled meetings, and the kind of coffee machines that required passwords. She had walked into the wrong office. I think I'm in the wrong place," she said quietly. "I was supposed to interview with a tax firm on the 5th floor." Graham blinked. Just once. Then, unexpectedly, he leaned back in his chair. "Well," he said, folding his hands, "now I'm curious." Evelyn's cheeks flushed with warmth. "I'm so sorry, don't be—" He tapped her resume. "This is interesting. You owned your own business for nearly 9 years. That takes grit." She nodded. "Until the divorce and the housing crash." He didn't blink. "And now you're applying to be a receptionist." "No," she said, a little more firmly. "I'm applying to start over." The silence that followed felt like an invisible thread tightening between them. Graham exhaled. "We're hiring." The last 2 assistants didn't last a month. Too much pressure. Too much me. Evelyn tilted her head. "Is that a warning or a confession?" He almost smiled. "Almost. I don't hire by accident," he said. "But today might be an exception." She didn't respond. She wasn't sure what to say. Graham closed the folder and stood. "I'll give you 3 days," he said. "Trial basis. If you're still standing by Friday, we'll talk. If not, you'll at least have a story to tell." Evelyn stood, too. Her heart was pounding now. "Trial basis," she repeated. Just like that. He looked at her. "You came into the wrong place and still held your ground. That tells me more than any interview ever could." She left the room, still clutching her worn leather folder, the badge on her chest, blinking under the lights like a joke from the universe. Maybe mistakes weren't always missteps. Maybe some doors opened precisely because they weren't meant to. Evelyn had never been more aware of the sound of her own footsteps. The 15th floor of Lancaster and Hayes was quiet in a way that wasn't peaceful, it was precise. The kind of quiet that didn't allow mistakes. As she walked down the corridor the next morning, heels clicking against polished marble, she felt like she was entering a world where people didn't stumble, they executed. And she had been hired by accident. Well, not quite hired. "Trial basis," Graham Lancaster had said. She clutched the temporary ID badge still clipped to her blouse. It didn't feel real. Then again, very little in her life had felt real for a while. At 7:59 a.m., she stood in front of a frosted glass door marked Executive Office, Jews Lancaster, and hesitated. A soft chime of the elevator behind her broke her stillness. She straightened her posture and knocked twice. "Come in." His voice was calm, but the kind of calm that didn't invite small talk. Evelyn stepped in. Graham Lancaster was already at his desk, reviewing documents with surgical focus. His office was minimalist, just like the man. A frame map of New York from the 1800s, a single standing lamp, no family photos, not even a plant. He didn't look up. "There's coffee on the cart to your right. Take what you need." "I don't usually drink coffee," she replied softly, walking in. "Makes me talk too much." He raised an eyebrow, still not looking at her. "You're in the wrong profession then." She smiled, despite herself. He finally set the papers down. "Let's talk ground rules." She nodded, standing across from him. "1, he began, counting on his fingers. "I don't do reminders more than once. If something's on the schedule, it's on the schedule. Understood. 2, no socializing with board members or clients. I've had assistants mistake charm for strategy. That won't be an issue." He glanced at her, then brief, but it lingered a second longer than necessary. 3, I require absolute confidentiality. She folded her hands in front of her. "Mr. Lancaster, I ran my own business for nearly a decade. Discretion was part of the job. So was humility." 4, he continued, as if she hadn't spoken. "Don't organize my desk." She blinked. "That one feels personal." "It is." She gave a half smile. "Duly noted." He finally leaned back, watching her more fully now. Why did your business fail? The question hit her like cold water. She paused. She could have said the economy, her ex-husband, bad timing. All of it would have been partially true, but she didn't come here to pretend. It didn't fail. She said, it unraveled. After my divorce, I had to sell the office to pay the legal fees. I didn't have the energy or the pride to start over. And now she held his gaze. Now, I'm less interested in appearances. I just want something I can build from, even if it's small, even if it's temporary. Graham nodded slowly. You know, I've had 3 executive assistants in the last year. 1 quit, 1 was fired, and 1 disappeared after a 2-hour lunch break and never came back. I admire her clarity, Evelyn said with a soft laugh. He actually chuckled. It was brief, and maybe even surprised him. Evelyn took the chair in front of his desk. May I ask something, Mr. Lancaster? He gestured for her to go on. You don't seem like a man who believes in accidents, so why give me a chance? He looked at her, and for a moment, something shifted in his eyes. Not warmth, exactly, but recognition. You walked into the wrong room and didn't flinch, he said. Most people would have apologized their way back into the elevator. Evelyn tilted her head slightly. I've done enough apologizing in life. At some point, you stop asking for permission to exist. There was a pause, a soft, mutual acknowledgement of something neither of them said out loud. Graham stood, walking toward the large window that overlooked the city. You know, he said, his voice low, when my wife died 4 years ago, everyone kept asking if I needed time off, if I needed to talk, but no one asked if I just wanted silence. Evelyn stayed quiet. He turned toward her. You speak in silence, he said. That's rare. She swallowed hard. Something about the moment felt fragile, like glass balanced on its edge. I'll do my best here, she said simply, whether it's for 3 days or 3 years. He nodded. We'll start with 3. She stood. Thank you. One last thing, he added as she walked to the door. She turned. My name is Graham. Just Graham. Mr. Lancaster makes me feel like my father, and we barely speak. Understood. Graham. As the door clicked shut behind her, Evelyn leaned against the hallway wall for just a second. The polished floor beneath her heels felt too perfect, too still. But inside, something stirred. A quiet feeling she hadn't felt in a long time. Hope not loud or bright, but quiet and persistent, like the hum of a city right before sunrise. By Thursday morning, Evelyn Brooks had learned 3 very specific things about working for Graham Lancaster. 1, he never asked twice. 2, he hated idle chatter, unless it came from the CFO's 3-year-old granddaughter during quarterly reports. That he found oddly refreshing. 3, he noticed everything. Not in the way of a micromanager? No. Graham was too efficient for that. But the man could spot a missing paperclip from across the room and recite a 14-digit client code from memory. There was no such thing as close enough in his world. Evelyn found it oddly calming. Precision, unlike people, was predictable. After 3 days of trial, she still didn't know if she was succeeding or merely tolerated. Graham never praised, but he didn't criticize either. He simply nodded when she handed him his schedule, raised an eyebrow when she corrected a misfiled email, and, once, muttered good save under his breath when she intercepted a double-booked investor call that felt like winning an award. But on Thursday afternoon, everything shifted. She was organizing a set of quarterly memos when she heard his voice from the doorway. Evelyn, can I see you in my office? She followed without question. Graham's office, as always, was pristine. A small tray of espresso cups sat untouched. The window blinds were half open, casting long shadows across the dark wood floor. He didn't sit behind his desk this time. Instead, he gestured to one of the guest chairs across from the small round table near the window. Something about the setup felt personal. Evelyn sat. Is this about the investor dinner tomorrow? I adjusted your talking points. Graham shook his head, slowly. No. This is about something different. He poured himself a glass of water. She noticed his hand lingered on the edge of the pitcher, longer than usual. "I need to ask something," he said, "and before you answer, I need you to understand it's not typical, and it's not professional." Evelyn's brow furrowed. "All right." Graham took a deep breath. "My family, specifically my uncle, controls a voting stake in the firm. He's old money, old views, and still thinks a man without a wife is a man without stability." He looked at her. "He's flying in next week, and he's bringing his lawyers." Evelyn blinked. "You think he's challenging your position? He's questioning my judgment. He always has. My marriage used to be the shield I never asked for. Now that it's gone, he's pressing harder." Evelyn stayed silent. "I need someone by my side," he said finally, "not just at dinner, but through a story." "A story," she repeated, cautiously. He nodded. "I need you to pretend to act as though we're in a committed relationship, just for the duration of his visit. Appearances only, nothing more." Evelyn stared at him. "That's quite the request. I know." His voice was softer now. "And I wouldn't ask if it weren't important. You're the only person I trust to do this with grace, with composure. You won't turn it into a game." She leaned back in the chair, arms crossed gently. "You want me to pretend to be your partner, not just at a meeting, but in your home, your personal life?" "Yes." "For how long?" "A week, maybe 2. "And what's in it for me?" she asked, her voice even, but her chest tight. "A bonus. Flexible hours after. A permanent contract with options for advancement." Evelyn looked away, out the window. She watched as a bird landed on the edge of the office terrace, paused, then flew off into the pale winter sky. This wasn't what she'd planned when she walked into the wrong office 3 days ago. She thought about her savings, dwindling, about the way her hands had trembled when she paid the rent last month, about how, for the first time in years, she'd woken up feeling needed, even if it was for invisible, unsung work. But deeper than that was the ache she never said aloud, the ache of being seen only through the lens of what she had lost, never what she could still offer. "Graham," she said quietly, "I've built myself back from the kind of wreck that doesn't make the news, but leaves scars all the same. I've learned to live with silence, but not with lies." "It's not a lie," he said, without missing a beat. "It's theater. And when the curtain drops, then we go back to the roles we were meant to play." She smiled wry, knowing. "Okay," she said, rising from the chair. "But I have 3 conditions." He tilted his head. "I'm listening." 1, no touching in private, public appearances only. Fair. 2, if anyone asks how we met, you let me tell the story. I'll make it believable. He nodded. 3, she added, stepping toward the door. You smile at least once a day. It won't kill you. He didn't laugh, but the corner of his mouth lifted, just slightly. Deal. As she stepped into the hallway, Evelyn whispered to herself, "This is either the boldest thing I've done in years, or the most foolish." The truth was, it might be both. Evelyn Brooks didn't believe in fate. She believed in choices, messy ones, brave ones, and sometimes the ones made out of sheer survival. But as she stepped into the guest apartment on the top floor of the Lancaster and Hayes building, she had to admit, this felt like something else entirely. "This is where you'll stay," Graham had said earlier that morning, handing her a discreet access card with her initials engraved. She hadn't asked for special treatment, but she hadn't exactly turned it down either. The apartment was quiet and clean, too clean. White walls, beige furniture, and curtains that moved only when the HVAC system decided to sigh. Everything had a place, and nothing felt lived in. A folded note on the kitchen counter read, "Use whatever you need. The fridge is stocked. I'll be in meetings until 6. G." She touched the paper for a moment longer than necessary. Evelyn unpacked slowly 2 dresses, a stack of old paperbacks, and a framed photo of her younger brother, who hadn't spoken to her since the divorce. She set it beside the bed, a quiet reminder of a time when love didn't have prerequisites. By late afternoon, she was seated at the kitchen island, a cup of tea cooling beside her, flipping through a leather-bound planner Graham had left. It was filled with meticulous handwriting, tight, slanted, economical. She smiled. Even his letters have structure, she murmured. The day had been uneventful until the knock. It was 6:04 p.m. Graham stood at the door, no tie, sleeves rolled up. For a man who usually looked like he was born in a boardroom, the relaxed version of him was surprisingly human. "I thought we could go over logistics," he said. "You mean our fake life?" He raised an eyebrow. "I prefer strategic alignment." She chuckled and stepped aside to let him in. They sat across from each other, a notebook between them. "We need a story," she said, tapping her pen. "People will ask, colleagues, your uncle, neighbors. Everyone loves a scandal." Graham tilted his head, considering. "How about we met at a bookstore, reaching for the same novel? Too romantic. A conference too cold. A misdelivered package." She smiled. "Now you're getting somewhere." "Fine. Package mix-up? Your name on my delivery. You returned it. I was rude. You were patient. Coffee was involved." "Better," she said, jotting it down. "And our timeline." 3 months. She gave him a skeptical glance. "That's optimistic. I'm a fast mover." She nearly laughed. "That, I doubt." They worked through details, favorite foods, weekend habits, shared memories that didn't exist, but now had to. At some point, Evelyn leaned back. "This feels like a play we never auditioned for." "It is," Graham said, "except the critics are billionaires, and the stage is my inheritance." He said it lightly, but Evelyn heard the fatigue in his voice, the weight of being constantly watched, judged, evaluated not for who he was, but what he represented. "I won't let you down," she said, unexpectedly. He looked at her. Really looked. "I don't think you will." There was a long pause, the kind that sits between two people who've seen enough of the world to know silence often says more than certainty. "You're not what I expected," he said finally. "I'm not sure I even know what I am anymore," she replied. Later that evening, Evelyn stood by the large window overlooking the city. Lights blinked in quiet rhythm. Somewhere far below, someone was walking a dog. Someone else was probably falling in love or ending something that had once mattered. This, whatever this was, sat in between, behind her. She heard Graham shift in his chair. "You don't have to do more than you're comfortable with," he said. "If at any point this becomes too much, just say so." She didn't turn around. "I've lived through worse. I didn't mean it like that." "I know," she said, voice low. "But I did." She didn't say it to draw pity. She said it because he seemed like someone who might actually hear it. They stood in silence for a few more moments. Then he cleared his throat. "There's a dinner tomorrow evening. My uncle's arriving early. I'd like you to be there." Evelyn turned, arms crossed lightly over her chest. Dress code, elegant, but not flashy. "Got it. I'll leave the sequins at home." He gave the faintest trace of a smile. As he moved toward the door, she called out, "Graham." He paused, hand on the doorknob. "I'm not just a prop," she said. "If I'm going to stand beside you, I want it to matter, even if only to us." He nodded once. "It will." The door closed with a soft click. Evelyn turned back to the window. The city hadn't changed, but something inside her had, for the first time in a long while, the walls she had built so carefully were starting to show cracks. And for once, she wasn't rushing to patch them, because maybe light needed a place to enter. The dining room in Graham Lancaster's penthouse apartment was as elegant as it was cold. Every surface gleamed under soft amber lighting, yet nothing in the room seemed to invite warmth. Not the table long and sharp-edged, nor the towering windows framing the night skyline like a painting that couldn't be touched. Evelyn Brooks had dressed with deliberate simplicity. A navy blue dress, pearl earrings, hair pulled back in a way that said composed, not trying too hard. She didn't want to look glamorous. She wanted to look credible. Across the room, Graham stood speaking with his uncle, Thomas Lancaster, a man whose presence filled the space even more than Graham's. Silver-haired, tall. His voice carried the kind of authority that came not from merit, but from money that had always existed. Evelyn observed quietly, glass of sparkling water in hand. Thomas turned toward her, his eyes narrowing slightly, not unkind, just calculating. "So," he said, extending a hand, "this is the woman who finally got Graham out of his emotional fortress." Evelyn smiled, firm handshake. "We're still renovating the fortress." Thomas laughed, witty. "I like that." Graham joined them, offering her the faintest nod, approval or warning. She couldn't tell. Dinner began with polite conversation mergers, real estate markets, the occasional jab at younger executives being too soft. Evelyn mostly listened, answering when spoken to, slipping in comments only when the silence stretched too thin. She could feel Thomas studying her, not overtly, but like a man trained to assess risk with every forkful of salmon. Midway through the meal, the shift happened. "So, Evelyn," Thomas said, dabbing his mouth with his napkin, "how did you and Graham meet?" She didn't blink. There was a package delivered to my old apartment. Wrong address. Wrong building. Actually, it was for Graham. I returned it personally. He was less than gracious. Thomas raised an eyebrow. "That doesn't surprise me." Graham smirked, sipping his wine. I told myself I'd never speak to him again. Evelyn continued, "But then we crossed paths a second time, this time at a bookstore. He remembered me. I pretended not to remember him. Didn't work," Graham added dryly. "No." She smiled. "He offered to buy the book I was holding. I declined, but he insisted on buying me coffee instead. A man of persistence." Thomas said, "Must be serious." Then Graham's hand brushed the back of Evelyn's chair, ever so lightly, just enough to play the part. "We're still figuring it out," Evelyn said gently, "but I don't do things halfway." Thomas nodded slowly, then leaned back in his chair. "You seem grounded." "I wasn't expecting that. I wasn't expecting any of this either," she replied. After dinner, while the staff cleared the table and Thomas took a call on the balcony, Evelyn stood at the window, arms folded. Graham stepped beside her. "You handled him well. I wasn't performing. I was telling a version of the truth. That's what makes you dangerous," he said quietly. She turned to him, brows lifted. "Is that a compliment?" He shrugged, an observation. They were silent for a moment. Then Evelyn spoke, her voice softer. "Do you ever feel like you're borrowing your own life? Wearing it like a suit that doesn't quite fit anymore?" Graham looked at her, and for a second, the facade cracked, all the time. His eyes dropped to the city lights. "I married young. Too young. Maybe. Julia was brilliant, loud, unfiltered. The opposite of this world. She didn't want this life. She tolerated it for me. When she passed, I stopped trying to make sense of anything." Evelyn didn't interrupt. She just let him speak. "I started measuring life in quarterly gains, efficiency, order, things I could control. But people," she said, "don't fit into spreadsheets." He let out a breath. "No, they don't." She turned to face him fully. "This arrangement, whatever it is, can't just be about appeasing your uncle. You asked me to help because somewhere in you, there's still a man who wants to be more than a figurehead." He looked at her, expression unreadable. "And what do you want out of this?" "Evelyn." She thought for a moment. "Peace, not the kind that comes from silence, the kind that comes from being seen and not having to prove anything." He nodded once, then let's make a deal. She raised an eyebrow. "No matter how real or fake this gets, we protect that peace for each other, non-negotiable." Evelyn extended her hand. "Agreed." They shook on it not like lovers, not like co-workers, but like two people finally admitting they were tired of standing alone. Later that night, Evelyn lay awake in the guest apartment, replaying the evening in her mind. The performance had worked. The plan was in motion. Everything was according to schedule. And yet, her heart felt unscheduled, slightly out of sync, not in fear, but in possibility. The invitation to Vermont wasn't really an invitation. It was an expectation. Thomas Lancaster had extended it with the casual weight of someone who assumed the world bent toward his arrangements. Family weekend at the estate. You and Evelyn will be there. Of course. Graham Lancaster hadn't flinched. Evelyn Brooks, on the other hand, had paused just long enough to know that this next chapter of their performance would require more than tailored outfits and smooth stories. This would be proximity, intimacy, authenticity masquerading as fiction. They arrived at the Lancaster family estate late Friday afternoon. The home, nestled among rolling hills just outside Snow Ridge, Vermont, was a portrait of inherited wealth, white pillars, stone chimneys, and ivy-covered balconies that had seen 100 winters. Evelyn stepped out of the car and exhaled. The air here was sharper, cleaner, and somehow heavier. This place doesn't feel real, she said, eyeing the pristine hedges. It's not, Graham replied. It's curated, like a gallery no one's allowed to touch. Inside, they were met by Margaret Lancaster, Graham's mother, whose handshake was cool and polite. She was elegant, in the way of women who were raised to make appearances feel effortless, even when they weren't. You must be Evelyn, she said. I've heard almost nothing about you. Evelyn smiled warmly. Then I'm a blank page. That's always a good place to start. Margaret blinked, not quite disapproving, but certainly not impressed. Graham stepped in, his tone smooth. Mother, we're both tired from the drive. I'm sure, she said, before turning. Dinner is at 7. Please don't be late. Their guest room was at the far end of the west wing. Graham placed their weekend bag on a bench near the bed and rubbed the back of his neck. She's always like that, Evelyn asked, unzipping her coat. She's worse when she thinks I'm pretending. Evelyn turned to face him. Is she the reason Julia never felt at home here? Graham didn't answer right away. His silence said more than words could. She didn't believe Julia was strong enough for this family, he said eventually. Julia believed too much in joy. That didn't match my mother's version of legacy. And what's your version? I haven't figured that out yet. Dinner that night was formal linen napkins, crystal glasses, conversation that tiptoed around anything personal. Evelyn watched the dynamics closely. Margaret said little, but her glances carried weight. Thomas was affable, but probing. And Graham. Graham had a way of going still when things got too close, not retreating, just pausing. Evelyn, Margaret said between courses, do you see yourself long-term in a place like this? Evelyn placed her fork down gently. That depends. Are we talking about geography? Or expectations? Thomas chuckled. She's quick. Graham, I like her. Margaret didn't smile. I mean legacy. Family. The name you'd be stepping into. Evelyn's tone remained soft. I believe in names built on character, not on stone gates. Graham reached beneath the table and lightly touched her hand, just for a second. It grounded him more than it did her. Later that night, as the estate quieted and snow began dusting the garden paths, Evelyn stood by the fireplace in their guest room, brushing her fingers along the edge of a framed photograph, Graham as a teenager, smiling, genuinely smiling. You look different when you're not holding the world together, she said. Graham sat in an armchair nearby, shoeless, shirt sleeves rolled to his forearms. That boy had fewer reasons to guard his heart. Who gave you the most reason? He looked up at her. Myself. She crossed the room slowly and sat on the rug by the fire. I spent years convincing myself that my marriage wasn't failing, she said, that if I just worked harder, compromised more, proved my worth better, things would change. He watched her, but they didn't, because it wasn't about my effort. It was about his emptiness, and I was always trying to fill it. A long silence settled between them. I think, Graham said finally, that you and I are very good at managing what others leave behind. Evelyn looked into the flames. I'm tired of managing. I want to start living. He stood and walked to her. Then, gently, he sat beside her on the floor, their shoulders nearly touching. This is a strange arrangement we've built, he said. Yes, she whispered, but parts of it feel more honest than anything I've had in a long time. He nodded, and for a while, They simply sat there, watching the fire crackle. No pretending, no lines to remember. Just two people, shaped by sorrow, finding comfort in the quiet. The next morning, as sunlight filtered through the heavy curtains, Evelyn woke to find a handwritten note beside her side of the bed. We don't have to be perfect in their world, just honest in ours. G. She held the note for a long time before pressing it gently against her chest. Maybe pretending had brought them here. But something very real was beginning to take root. Sunday morning in Snow Ridge arrived with a sky the color of steel and a hush that felt almost sacred. The snowfall from the night before had blanketed the estate in white, softening sharp corners and silencing the usual creaks of the old house. Evelyn Brooks woke before the sun, pulled on a wool sweater, and made her way down to the library, where Graham had said they kept the good coffee, not the polished ceremonial stuff Margaret insisted on serving guests. She found him there, surprisingly, already dressed, already reading. Couldn't sleep, she asked softly, leaning in the doorway. He looked up, eyes calm but shadowed. Too quiet. I thought you liked silence. I used to. Now I think I just got used to it. She crossed the room and sat opposite him, curling her legs beneath her. The coffee between them steamed quietly. Do you regret this? She asked. This he echoed, looking at her. The arrangement. She nodded. He considered her carefully. Not yet. I think I was expecting more distance, she said, emotionally. He smiled faintly. You're too good at this. Pretending being present. Evelyn tilted her head. That's a nice way of saying I'm making things complicated. No, he said softly. You're making them feel real. That silenced her for a moment. Graham set his book aside, leaned back in the armchair. When Julia died, I shut everything down. My feelings, my routines, my voice. I thought the stillness would keep me safe. Did it? She asked gently. No, he said. It just made me forget who I was. Evelyn didn't reach for him. She didn't speak. She simply stayed. That, Graham realized, was what made her different. She didn't fill silences. She honored them. Later that day, Margaret requested a family walk through the orchard. It was more of a parade of appearances than a stroll. Graham took Evelyn's hand without prompting. She let him. Thomas trailed beside them, hands behind his back, whistling softly. So, he said, voice low, how long before you two stopped pretending? Evelyn blinked. Excuse me. Oh, I know. He smiled, amused. I've been in enough boardrooms to recognize a staged partnership. Graham stiffened, but Thomas raised a hand. Don't worry, you've fooled everyone else. But not me. And honestly, I think you've both fooled yourselves a little, too. Evelyn glanced at Graham. He said nothing. Thomas lowered his voice, more thoughtful now. You think pretending is the same as protecting. But be careful. Sometimes the mask fits too well. You forget there's a face underneath. That night. The fire in the guest room crackled steadily as Evelyn sat at the vanity, brushing out her hair, thoughts heavy, behind her. Graham stood by the window, glass of scotch in hand, back straight but tense. I've never brought anyone here before, he said quietly. She met his eyes in the mirror. Not even Julia. Not after we married. She hated this place. Called it a mausoleum with curtains. Evelyn smiled faintly. She sounds like she was bold. She was... He paused. She also made me uncomfortable in all the right ways. I loved her for that. And now I still love her, he said, but differently, with memory, not presence. He turned to face her fully. You're not her, Evelyn. You never will be. But you've started to fill a space I forgot was empty. She stood, slowly. I'm not asking to replace her, she said, stepping closer. I just don't want to be someone you use to escape missing her. I'm not escaping, he said. I'm learning how to exist again. With you. Her heart beat louder than the fire. You can't say things like that when this isn't real, she whispered. Isn't it? He asked, voice low, because I stopped keeping track. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she reached out and touched his hand gently, not romantically, not possessively, just human to human. I'm scared, Graham, she admitted. Not of you, of wanting something again. He didn't move, but his hand closed around hers. Slowly. So am I. That night, they didn't kiss. They didn't cross a line. But Evelyn lay in bed, aware of the soft weight of his presence in the room beside hers. She stared at the ceiling for a long time, hands resting over her chest like a prayer she hadn't yet spoken aloud. This wasn't a performance anymore, not entirely, and that more than anything terrified her. Because the most dangerous kind of love was the one that came wrapped in silence and sincerity, without ever asking for permission. The Lancaster estate faded into the rearview mirror like a memory Evelyn wasn't sure how to categorize, part fairy tale, part warning. She and Graham barely spoke on the drive back to Hartville, but it wasn't a silence born of conflict. It was reflection, uneasy and fragile, the kind that fills a space when both people are quietly wondering the same thing. What happens now? Back at Lancaster and Hayes, the corporate world moved as if nothing had changed. Meetings resumed, emails flowed, investors barked over budgets. The rhythms of profit and power never waited for matters of the heart. But Evelyn was not the same, and neither was the way people looked at her. She felt it the moment she stepped onto the executive floor. Shoulders turned slightly as she passed. Voices softened. Glances lingered a second too long. By Wednesday morning, the whispers had turned into fragments. Did you see her with him in Vermont? She must be angling for something. I heard she used to be married. Real estate agent. That's a leap. Evelyn kept her head high, her steps steady. She had endured worse, but it still stung. Especially when it came from Caroline Vega, the VP of Corporate Affairs, a woman with a smile like glass and ambition sharper than Graham's most ruthless acquisition. They crossed paths by the elevators just before lunch. Caroline leaned in, her voice smooth. Congratulations on the promotion. Evelyn blinked. I'm not sure I follow. Caroline tilted her head. You've certainly risen fast. From temp hire to girlfriend of the CEO. That's impressive, strategic. Evelyn's spine straightened. I wasn't aware decency required credentials. Caroline smirked. Everything requires credentials, especially at this level. The elevator dinged. Evelyn stepped inside without another word, heart pounding not with fear, but frustration. She had always known some people would never see her for who she was, only what they assumed she wanted. What she hadn't expected was to feel so alone in it. That evening, she found Graham in his office, still in his dress shirt, sleeves rolled up, eyes scanning documents he probably wasn't really reading. You knew they'd talk, she said, closing the door gently behind her. He looked up, surprised. I thought it would pass. It won't. He sighed. You've done nothing wrong. Evelyn, except breathe near the throne, she said. In this building, even standing beside power is seen as stealing it. He pushed his chair back, face tense. I'll address it. No, she said firmly. Don't. Why not? Because if you defend me, they'll say it's favoritism. If you don't, they'll say it's proof I'm just convenient. Either way, I lose. He stood now, crossing to her. Then what do you want me to do? She searched his face, quiet for a beat. See me, she said. Not in meetings, not at events. Here, now, when it's hardest. His jaw tightened. You think I haven't. I think you're afraid to choose me publicly. I brought you to my family estate, he said. That's not public enough. She shook her head. That was a performance, Graham. And maybe, for a moment, it became more. But this moment isn't a script. It's a choice. He stepped closer, voice low. So what are you saying I'm saying, she said carefully, that if I stay, I need to know I'm not just filling a gap you can't name. You're not. Then say it. Silence. That was the answer, not cruelty, not rejection, just silence. She nodded slowly, holding his gaze one last time. I'm taking the rest of the week off. I need space. Evelyn. But she was already turning. If I mean something, she said without looking back, you'll find a way to show it that doesn't require me to be convenient. That night, her corporate apartment felt cavernous. The fridge hummed like a metronome, counting down the seconds since she had last felt certain. She took out her notebook, the one with all the false details of their relationship, the backstories they had invented. Slowly, she tore each page out, folded it once, and stacked it beside the window. Fiction had brought them together, but fiction was no longer enough to keep her there. The apartment was quiet, not the kind of quiet Graham Lancaster had cultivated for years, the intentional, clinical silence of efficiency. No, this was different. This was the silence of absence, of Evelyn Brooks. Her presence had changed the apartment subtly but undeniably. A worn leather notebook on the counter, a scarf hanging on the back of the dining chair, a half-finished mug of herbal tea still sitting by the window. Now, all of it remained. But she didn't. Graham stood by the window where she had often stared out over the city. He picked up her notebook and opened it, expecting careful notes or reminders. Instead, he found folded pages all blank on one side and filled with details of their fake relationship on the other. Except now, the pages had been crossed out, softly, neatly, one line through each invented story, as if she were erasing a version of herself she no longer wanted to carry. At the bottom of the last page, in small handwriting, she had written, "If it was real. You'd have said so, if it wasn't. I had to leave before I believed it was. E." Graham let the notebook rest in his hand a moment longer, then placed it gently back on the counter. The next morning, he showed up to work precisely at 7:45 a.m. Everything ran on time. The meetings were productive, the coffee was hot, but the office felt hollow. He caught himself glancing toward her desk, still tidy, untouched since she left. No signs of chaos, no forgotten pens, no Evelyn. When Caroline Vega stopped by his office that afternoon, she spoke with her usual air of effortless confidence. "I see she's gone," she said, not bothering to mask her tone. He didn't answer. Caroline sat down. "You know, Graham, I've always admired your precision, but you've never been good at people." He looked up, brow raised. "I mean relationships," she said, folding one leg over the other. "You're sharp, efficient, brilliant even. But emotionally, you're all closed doors." "Is there a point to this?" he asked coolly. She smiled. "You let someone into your world, and you let her leave without stopping her. That's not strength. That's fear." He watched her for a beat, then spoke quiet, measured. "You're not wrong." Caroline blinked. Graham stood and walked to the window. "I've spent my life building walls." But Evelyn, she wasn't trying to tear them down. She just stood outside, waiting to be let in. "She's a temporary hire," Caroline said. "She doesn't belong in this world." "No," he said. "She belongs in mine. I just didn't realize it until she walked away." Caroline rose, lips thinning. So now what chase after her? He didn't respond. She left without another word. That evening, Graham returned to the apartment and moved slowly through the rooms. Everything was in its place, except him. He sat at the dining table, opened his laptop, and pulled up an old file, personal letters, unsent. It had been years since he added anything. His last entry had been to Julia, a farewell he never sent. Tonight, he wrote a new letter. "Evelyn, I've built an empire with numbers, with facts, with schedules I can control, but I don't know how to build something from silence. I didn't say the words, not because they weren't real, but because I didn't trust myself to speak them without needing to explain them away. You were never convenient. You were necessary. You saw me and I didn't know how to be seen. You waited, and I made you feel like a placeholder. You left, and I finally felt what it means to lose something I never owned. I want to choose you, not for show, not for strategy, for peace, for presence, for whatever comes next. If you still have space in your story for a man who learns slowly, I'm here. G. He didn't send it, not yet, but he printed it, folded it, and tucked it between the pages of her notebook, where all the lies had once lived. Because maybe, finally, he was ready to offer her something real. Evelyn Brooks hadn't planned to stay away for long. She just needed room to breathe away from whispers, expectations, and the weight of being someone else's proof of emotional progress. She rented a small apartment in a quieter part of Hartville, an older building with crooked floorboards and windows that creaked in the wind. Imperfect, but hers. And in that new silence, she began to piece herself back together, not the version created by a contract or assumed by gossip. Just Evelyn, former business owner, woman of mistakes, survivor of silence, and someone who still believed, stubbornly, in beginnings. During the day, she started volunteering at a small nonprofit counseling center for women going through divorce and life transitions. It was quiet, work steady, meaningful, the kind that didn't ask for explanations. On Wednesday afternoon, she sat across from a woman named Mara, who reminded her too much of herself at 35 careful words, forced smiles, and eyes filled with untold stories. I feel like I keep waiting for permission to start over, Mara whispered. Evelyn nodded. Start anyway. No one's going to hand you a clean slate. You have to make peace with the one you've got. After Mara left, Evelyn sat alone in the tiny office, staring out the window. Her words had been meant for someone else, but she felt them land inside her, sharp and true. That evening, she walked home under a soft drizzle, coat clutched close, the city humming with life. As she rounded the corner to her building, she stopped. Graham Lancaster was sitting on the steps. No suit, no polished briefcase. Just him, hands folded, eyes tired, and face open in a way she hadn't seen before. She stood still for a long beat. You look like someone who's lost a war, she said gently. He looked up, then stood. I did, he replied. With myself. She didn't respond. I didn't come to fix things. He added, I came because silence is comfortable for me, but I'm done choosing comfort over connection. Evelyn crossed her arms, not defensive, just bracing. I didn't need a grand gesture. Graham, I just needed to know I wasn't invisible. I know, he said, and I let you believe you were, because I thought being still was safer than being honest. He stepped forward, holding something in his hand. Her notebook. I didn't read everything, he said, but I found what you wrote. He pulled out the folded letter, the one he had written, printed, and never sent. She took it silently and unfolded it. Her eyes moved across the words slowly, expression unreadable. When she reached the end, she didn't speak right away. Instead, she walked past him, unlocked the front door, and gestured slightly. Come in. The apartment was small, warm, lit by a single standing lamp and the faint smell of chamomile tea. She poured 2 cups and set one on the table beside him. I don't want another performance, she said. I don't either. I don't want to be something you choose only when it's quiet or convenient. Graham looked at her, pain evident, but steady. I'm choosing you now, not as a placeholder, not as proof, but because I know what life felt like with you in it, and what it feels like without you. She sat beside him, hands wrapped around her mug. I'm scared, she said. So am I. What if we ruin it? She whispered. He smiled, gently. Then we'll rebuild it. Honestly this time, slowly. She was quiet, then asked, why now? Graham, he took a breath. Because you were the first person who didn't ask me to be less of who I am and still saw more in me than I did. She looked down at her tea. That sounds like a good start. Then, softly, she reached out and placed her hand over his. No scripts, no stage lights, no masks. Just 2 hands, 2 people, and something real between them, finally given permission to begin again. The invitation came 3 days later, a formal envelope, hand-delivered. Margaret Lancaster was hosting a private luncheon. No staff, no board members, no press, just Graham, Evelyn, and her, The last time the three of them had shared a table, Evelyn had been balancing grace against judgment. This time, she wasn't performing, and she wasn't afraid. The Lancaster brownstone in the historic district of Hartville was as imposing as Evelyn remembered: tall columns, manicured hedges, and silence that echoed louder than words. Graham walked beside her up the stone steps, his expression unreadable. "She never invites anyone casually," he said, "especially not me." Evelyn adjusted her coat. "Then let's not waste it. Inside." The dining room was smaller than expected, intimate. Real flowers on the table, no pretense of grandeur. Margaret stood as they entered. She looked older somehow, or perhaps just less guarded. "Thank you for coming," she said, her voice calm. They sat, Graham to her right, Evelyn to her left. There were no servants, no wine glasses, just tea, water, and a light meal of roasted chicken, fresh greens, and rosemary bread. It felt almost ordinary. For a while, they ate in silence. Then Margaret cleared her throat. "I wanted to say something." She began. "Something I should have said weeks ago." Neither Evelyn nor Graham spoke. She turned to Evelyn. "When I first met you, I saw a woman who didn't belong, not because you weren't elegant, but because I couldn't understand how someone like you, someone with warmth, could survive in our world." Evelyn raised her brows slightly, not expecting honesty. Margaret continued, "But then I watched how you looked at him, not with calculation, not with strategy, but with stillness. That's rare." She looked down at her tea. "Julia and we didn't understand each other. I mistook her lightness for carelessness. She mistook my silence for disapproval. And when she died, I carried more regret than grief." Graham's posture shifted slightly, but he didn't speak. Margaret looked at him now. "I failed you, too," she said. "You grieved by closing the doors. I let you. I even applauded it, because it made you stronger in the world's eyes, but colder in mine." Evelyn felt something tighten in her chest. "I thought," Margaret added softly, "that love looked like legacy, like keeping the name clean, but watching you two. I realize love looks more like mess and courage than control." She turned back to Evelyn. "I don't know if this relationship will last, but I know you brought my son back from somewhere I couldn't reach." There was a long pause. Then Evelyn said gently, "He did the same for me." Margaret nodded once. "I'm not here to give approval," she added. "You don't need it, but I am here to offer peace." Evelyn smiled, and for the first time, it reached her eyes. "Peace," she echoed. "That's all we've ever asked for." After lunch, Graham and Evelyn walked through the garden behind the brownstone, a narrow path framed by bare-limbed trees and remnants of autumn leaves. Graham was quiet, hands in his coat pockets. "She's never apologized to anyone before," he said finally. "Not even my father." Evelyn looked up at him. That was brave. He nodded, and overdue. They paused at a stone bench. Graham sat. Evelyn joined him. "I used to think love was about loyalty," he said, "staying, enduring, building something that wouldn't break." And now she asked, "Now I think love is about recognition, seeing someone, even when they're not asking to be seen, and still choosing them anyway." Evelyn reached over and laced her fingers through his. "I think love," she said quietly, "is also about letting the storm pass, not because you ran from it, but because you stood through it together." He looked at her. "Is this our storm settling?" She smiled, maybe just the eye of it. He laughed, gently. "Fair enough." That night, back in Evelyn's apartment, they unpacked a small bag of groceries to gather: soup, bread, cheese, wine. They didn't talk much. They didn't need to. The silence between them had changed. It no longer asked for explanations. It simply allowed for presence. They didn't plan a wedding. There were no formal invitations, no embossed menus, no flower arrangements designed to impress. But there was a morning in late spring, soft light, open windows, and two people standing on a rooftop garden above Hartville, where the wind moved gently and nothing felt forced. It wasn't an event. It was a moment. Evelyn Brooks wore a simple dress, ivory linen, soft at the edges, paired with the same pearl earrings she'd worn to the dinner with Graham's uncle so many weeks ago. Graham Lancaster stood beside her in a navy suit, no tie. His hands weren't trembling, but his eyes held something more vulnerable than nerves. Conviction. They had invited only a few. Margaret Lancaster sat quietly beside Thomas, both dressed with understated grace. Evelyn's younger brother, Noah Brooks, had come to their first reunion in years. The hug between them had lasted longer than either expected. Even Mara, the woman Evelyn had once counseled, was there, quietly wiping a tear before the ceremony began. And in front of them all, with no officiant and no script, Evelyn and Graham spoke their own vows, not from memory, but from the heart. Graham went first. "I used to think silence protected me," he said, "that if I didn't say the words, they couldn't be taken from me. But I've learned that silence can be a form of absence. And I don't want to be absent anymore, not from you, not from the life we're building." He took a breath. "You didn't ask me to change. You just made me want to show up differently. And now, every day, I want to choose you, not for the version of me you see, but because, with you, I finally see myself." Evelyn smiled softly, her voice steady. "I've spent much of my life asking permission to begin again, waiting for someone to say I was worthy of another chance. But you never gave me permission. You gave me a mirror." She stepped closer. "I don't love you because you fixed anything. I love you because you saw all that was broken in me and stayed anyway. You made the quiet feel safe, and the chaos feel manageable, and the unknown feel like something we could walk into together." Her eyes glistened, but her voice didn't waver. "So, I'm not promising perfection. I'm promising presence. I'm not offering forever. I'm offering every day I wake up and still choose to stand beside you. Not because I have to, but because I believe in us." There were no applause, no officiant's declaration, just the sound of the wind brushing through rooftop ivy, and a few tears quietly wiped by hands that knew what love really looked like, not polished, not flawless, but earned. Later that evening, back in Evelyn's apartment, still their sanctuary, Graham lit 2 candles and poured wine into mismatched glasses. "I left the company this afternoon," he said casually. Evelyn nearly dropped her glass. "You what?" "I stepped down as CEO. I'm moving into a board advisory role. 1 meeting a month, tops." She stared at him. "Why?" He smiled. "Because I don't want to measure my life in quarterly reports anymore. I want to measure it in mornings with you, in real conversations, in community." He reached into his coat pocket and handed her a folder. "What's this A proposal?" She opened it slowly. Inside were plans for a non-profit foundation co-founded by both of them, dedicated to providing emotional, legal, and housing support for women restarting after divorce, domestic difficulty, or life transition. He looked at her, hopeful but grounded. "I don't just want to live differently. I want to do something that matters. You showed me how." She didn't cry. She just walked over, rested her head against his chest, and whispered, "I think we're finally writing a story worth keeping." Months later, someone asked Evelyn how it all began. She smiled. Wrong office, right beginning. They laughed. But in her heart, she knew it hadn't been wrong at all. Sometimes, life doesn't mislead you. It reroutes you toward the place you never planned to be, but were always meant to find. Evelyn didn't walk into the right room, but somehow it opened the right life. Sometimes, fate doesn't knock. It just waits for you to be brave enough to stay, even when the world makes you feel like you don't belong. This story isn't just about love. It's about dignity. It's about choosing to see people beyond the labels, the resumes, and the whispers in the hallway. Evelyn and Graham's journey reminds us that everyone deserves a second chance. That worth isn't measured by power or prestige, but by how gently we hold space for each other. And that no matter how many times life shuts the door, you're still worthy of walking through one that opens even by mistake. If you've ever been judged too quickly, overlooked, underestimated, or made to feel like you had to prove your place, please remember, you are not alone. Let Shining Stories continue to be a home for stories that heal, that challenge, that remind us what it means to be deeply human. If this story moved you, like to show your support, share it with someone who might need hope right now, and subscribe to Shining Stories so you won't miss what's coming next. Because every voice matters, and every story, even the ones that begin with a mistake, deserves to be heard.